What is up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Rewired Soul podcast. It's your host, Chris, and I have an amazing guest today. His name is Hugo Mercier, and I'll introduce him in just a second. If you've been staying tuned this week, we've been focusing on scientific thinking and having healthy conflict, when we disagree on ideas and all that kind of good stuff. And, Monday we talked to Andy Norman, Tuesday we talked to Lee McIntyre, and today we're talking to Hugo Mercier. So, when I came across Hugo Mercier's first book with Dan Sperber, it was called The Enigma of Reason, all right? And I came across this book because I was trying to understand, how do we reason? Why are we so irrational? Why do we, lie to ourselves? Why do we lie to others? What kind of processes do we go through? And I just started reading a ton of books on this stuff. And I absolutely loved The Enigma of Reason because it came from this kind of evolutionary psychology point of view. And I was like, I love that stuff. I love me some evolutionary psychology. Well, anyways, Hugo just released another book. I believe it was last year. It's called Not Born Yesterday, which was perfect because, as some of you know, I really got into the whole subject of trust. Why do we trust people? How do we know who to trust and all this kind of stuff with so much human interaction? So, since Hugo is the reason researcher, I thought it'd be perfect to have his episode this week when we're talking about becoming better thinkers and looking at the world in a better way and having better conversations and everything like that. So I'm super excited for you guys to hear this conversation that I had with Hugo. And before I introduce him, just be sure that if you're new here, make sure that you follow the podcast or subscribe if you're over on Apple. Leave a rating and review and share it with people you know. And you know why? You know why I ask you to do this from the bottom of my heart? It's because we're a newer podcast. I think we're officially 2 months in. But when you engage with it, when you rate it, review it, follow it, share it, it helps with the algorithm. And it's like, hey, I'm going to push this podcast out to some more people who might like this stuff. And I'm also asking some questions from the community, all of you wonderful people. So make sure, check down in the description. Not only will there be links to Hugo's books, but also his social media, as well as my social media, if you ever want to get in touch. But I'm also posting questions of, different ways to improve the podcast and all that kind of stuff. All right. So make sure you check all that stuff down below. But anywho, without further ado, here's my conversation with Hugo Mercier. Hello, Hugo, and thank you so much for coming on the podcast. Real quick, for those out there who don't know you, can you please introduce yourself?
Hi, this is Hugo Mercier. I am a researcher at the CNRS in France. I work at the Institut Jean Nicot in Paris, and I study reason and communication in humans.
Awesome. So I wanted to start out by talking about your first book, The Enigma of Reason. So in this book, you argue that humans developed reasoning not based on pure logic, but more for social reasons. And in this book, you discuss why we trust certain people and not others. So if you had to choose, what would you say is the number one factor for why we trust people? Is it social status, previous credibility, or something else?
Broadly, there are two main dimensions that we take into account when deciding whether to believe what someone tells us, based on who they are, based on the source. The first is whether the source is deemed competent and expert in the relevant domain, so whether they are likely to be right or not, whether they are likely to know the truth or to have good advice. And the other factor is the source's benevolence, or whether their interests align with ours. And which factor matters the most will depend on the circumstances. But broadly, in across broad range of contexts, whether the source has our best interests at heart is what matters the most. Because even if it is someone who is very competent and very knowledgeable, if you don't think they want to tell you the truth, the fact that they know the truth is largely irrelevant. But crucially, this is very, very flexible. And so, for instance, if you start playing poker with your best friends or with family members, you will stop trusting them immediately. And so that if they tell you that you have to fold, you probably shouldn't fold. So we're very much able to take into account not only the broad kind of relationship that people have with us, whether it's a friend or someone who we've never known, we've never met, but also the much more kind of specific incentives that bear on each situation. And so, I think broadly, this is people's incentives and whether we think they have either an incentive to mislead us or, on the contrary, an incentive to maintain good long-term relationships with us. That will be the main factor deciding whether we trust them or not.
Yeah, and that makes total sense. And it's something that I've been thinking about a lot lately. As you said, one of the primary factors is, do we feel that this person has our best interest, right? And, off the top of my head, just even thinking about politics, if you're liberal, you're more likely to trust, another liberal, right? But if it comes from somebody who's conservative, you're going to be a little bit more skeptical. And this is something I've been talking with some other authors about, too, is like, are we more skeptical or gullible? And based on what you're saying, it feels like it's really contextual, right? So we might be more gullible if it's somebody that we think that we vetted and they have our best interests and all that kind of stuff. But we will be more skeptical if we feel that their interests don't align with ours. So that's something that I personally try to be very mindful of, and I try to teach others and have conversations about and read books about like motivated reasoning. Like when I'm getting information from a source and I'm going through and trying to think do I need to fact check this? Should I trust this? And all that kind of stuff. One of the things I try to ask is, because it might seem as though they have my interest in mind, but there might be something else going on. For example, maybe, it's advantageous for them to be telling me this information. Can it benefit them in any way? But I think that perfectly segues into this next question. Speaking of politics, so earlier this year on January 26th, we saw the Capitol insurrection, right? And a majority of this, what led to this, was these claims of voter fraud where there was no evidence, right? So many of the people who stormed the Capitol also believe in things like QAnon conspiracy theories. So based on your research, why do you believe that people will, take action that could potentially harm themselves or even harm others completely based on unsubstantiated claims?
So in that case, I would question the premise of the question in the sense that I do not believe that that these conspiracy theories about voter frauds really played a major causal role in what happened. In the sense that according to polling data, millions of Americans share this concern about voter frauds, and a few hundreds of them actually did anything about it. So that suggests that the beliefs in themselves are clearly not sufficient to lead to these more dramatic action. So my take on this type of beliefs is that they are more usefully interpreted as a symptom rather than as a cause of what's happening. And so if indeed you have these kind of claims of voter fraud, for instance, that are becoming widespread in the population, that suggests that there's a very high degree of distrust towards either politics in general or at least towards one political party, and that is very, very problematic. But the beliefs do not cause the mistrust. It is really the other way around. And you can sort of see that when you look at other countries in which these beliefs of voter fraud and of political malfeasance more generally are much more grounded in reality. And then you can have literally half of the country, taking to the street, like you might have seen in Belarus and other countries, which is extremely different from what happened in the US. So then again, the fact that these false beliefs spread is worrying, but not because of the effects of these beliefs, but because of what it means about the people who accept them, and the fact that they are in a position that might lead them to take drastic action, and the beliefs then just act as a kind of post hoc rationalization for taking this kind of action that is otherwise motivated.
All right. I see what you're saying, and that makes sense too. With there's been some polling data and things like that about overall trust of just the media, right? But there's a lot of distrust for the government and things like that. So yeah, that makes sense, and I would assume I might be completely incorrect, but it seems like we will believe things where if it seems intuitively correct, right? Like almost like, oh, well, the government hasn't benefited me, they're not really looking out for me. So then when you hear something like this and, voting didn't go your way, it's like, okay, it's a little bit more believable. So yeah, hopefully the government and news organizations and a bunch of other people start earning that trust back. So the COVID pandemic has been something that most of us have never seen in our lifetime. Many of my family members and friends are now vaccinated. Even my 12-year-old son, he was the last one of the bunch to get vaccinated, but since they said, hey, 12-year-olds can get vaccinated, so now he is vaccinated. But yeah, like I've been vaccinated too, but even with the vaccine now being out for months with little to no negative side effects for most people, right? Like most people, they have just very mild symptoms. There was that blood clot scare, but that was, I believe, like 1 in a million, things like that. So what I've been curious about is while some people are anti-vaxxers who still believe in the misinformation from Andrew Wakefield about the MMR vaccine, minority communities, they're also hesitant about these vaccines due to, misinformation and some shady things that have been done in the past. So based on your research and your experience, if you had to develop a plan, right, you could do whatever you want. If you had to develop a plan, to get more people to trust the vaccines, what would that look like? Does that involve getting celebrities and politicians to endorse the vaccine, which we've already seen? I don't know if that's, helped at all. Or would you get, communities to build trust just based on social proof, or is there, something else that you would try?
So yes, the problem of vaccine hesitancy is indeed a very kind of sadly relevant one these days, and it's not a new one either. So in terms of the causes, so you mentioned the Andrew Wakefield that fraudulent study that was published in the Lancet that claimed to link vaccine with autism, and that has been not only debunked but really again shown to have been fraudulent. Actually, studies suggest that this particular piece of research had relatively little impact on beliefs about vaccination, or rather on vaccination rates. More precisely, it had some impact on vaccination rates when it was still believed to be accurate, and when only doctors essentially knew about it. And some doctors took that into account, which is to some extent sensible in their recommendation to not vaccinate children. But the effects were relatively small. And then what is quite kind of interesting and counterintuitive is that when that study became widely publicized, essentially around the time that it got debunked, many people learned about it, but it had no effect on vaccination rates. And so the pattern that we find across the world and across history is that in just about every population, there is some resistance to vaccination. Vaccination, for a variety of reasons, is not an intuitive form of therapy, however incredibly effective it might be. And what is striking is that in every population you see different reasons for rejecting vaccination. Like obviously, you might be more familiar with the kind of MMR and autism theory. In France, it's something about some other disease that is supposed to be caused by vaccination. In other countries, it is, vaccination gives you AIDS, or vaccination, makes you impotent, or vaccination is, a conspiracy by some foreign power. So every country essentially has their own theories for why vaccination is bad, their own, bad theory about why vaccination is bad. But these theories, as again in the case of the beliefs about voter fraud and the Capitol riots, these beliefs are mostly kind of post hoc rationalizations that are used to justify an intuitive rejection of vaccination. So again, they're more of a symptom of a deeper problem rather than a cause of the problem. So that's one thing. And when consequence it has to regarding how to fight anti-vaccine beliefs or anti-vaccine attitudes, is that even trying to debunk this kind of Wakefield study, for instance, is going to have relatively little impact, presumably, because most people are not vaccine hesitant because of that study. They are vaccine hesitant, and that is what makes them interested and happy to accept that study. So the effect would be limited. Now, all of the suggestions that you make regarding how to fight vaccine hesitancy are sound. So get celebrities and politicians to endorse the vaccine. Sure, I mean the effects might not be huge, but it can't hurt. This is especially less likely to work if it comes from politicians who might be perceived as kind of associated with more kind of anti-vaccine movement. So in the US, at the moment, it wasn't true at the beginning, but at the moment it is mostly kind of Republicans who are compared to Democrats, who are more likely to be vaccine hesitant. And so seeing Republican politicians and personalities get vaccinated publicly is a good thing. Social proof, so essentially the power of norms, is also good, and there has been studies, for instance, in hospitals showing that when hospital personnel can wear a little kind of label to say that they have been vaccinated. I think it was against for the flu vaccine in these studies. Then it prompts other people to also get vaccinated because they can see how many of their colleagues have been vaccinated. One thing we have been working on is a chatbot that can address the vast majority of people's concerns about vaccination, and that I think works quite well. For people who have kind of genuine concerns, especially regarding the COVID vaccines. Some extent rational concerns about the speed with which the vaccines were created, or some of the side effects that we are now seeing with some of the adenovirus-based vaccines. And we have shown that this tool, when people engage with it for a few minutes, it can significantly shift their opinions towards being more pro-vaccine. So that can work. But essentially, I think every individual method is going to have, or every individual intervention is going to have relatively small effects. And so you want to throw everything you can at the problem, because different interventions will work for different people, and because you want to reach as many people as possible.
That's really interesting about the Andrew Wakefield stuff, and it had little to no impact on vaccine hesitancy. But yeah, I think a problem I struggle with, and I'm not sure how many people can relate to it. But yeah, when you brought up that each country kind of has their own specific reasons for vaccine hesitancy, I'm like, oh yeah, that makes sense, and I don't know how often we take that into consideration. But yeah, that's awesome. Like, I've read books like what was it, like Robert Cialdini's famous book on persuading people and things like that. And I try to think about that stuff because when you're talking about that social proof and wearing a little badge or pin or, sign like, hey, I got vaccinated. I think about, research that shows how when people like flaunt that they voted and their little voting stickers, like when people see, oh, someone like me did this thing, okay, maybe I'll do it. But also that chatbot that you mentioned is very interesting. And here's my belief. Here is what I think. I think that governments should have just social psychologists just on board with just about everything, because if we don't understand human behavior, it's very difficult to get things going. And I know that there are people like Richard Thaler and Cass Sunstein who worked with like the Obama administration. I'm curious how much their impact was while working with the that administration, but I don't see it as often as we should. It seems like all the publicity and all the news is around like, oh, vaccine passports and this and this and this. And we're not really getting to the root of what's going on with vaccine hesitancy. What does the research show can counteract this? And how do we implement it? You know what I mean? So in Not Born Yesterday, one of the chapters that I absolutely love, like you helped me so much, so let me thank you for that. But the chapter I absolutely loved was on why we gossip, right? So in it, you explain that this is kind of a form of social grooming and how we know who we can and can't trust, and why this was important, throughout evolution and, our old school tribes and all that. So since the dawn of like movies and television, we've seen celebrity gossip become like this main staple in our society, right? Like today, like one of the biggest genres on YouTube is YouTube drama or on social media, and regular people become obsessed with this gossip. So in your opinion, why do you think we're drawn towards gossip when it's about celebrities or influencers? Because it doesn't seem to make sense, because these are people we've never met. So why does it matter whether we trust them or not? Like, it makes sense if if we're talking about, our family or, friends or people in our social circles, because, or even our coworkers, these are people that we have to interact with, and like we're going to need to trust them at some point or know if we can't trust them. But I've been curious why we do this with people that we're most likely never going to meet.
So that's a good question. The usual kind of interpretation of why we like celebrity gossip, I think, is that it is a type of kind of super stimulus in a way. So, in order to decide what kind of information you should pay attention to, you look for a number. People look for a number of cues. And so, for instance, if some social information is about people who are powerful or beautiful or smart, or socially valued in any possible way, that information becomes more relevant. And so that's true of of the people I mean, everything else equal, maybe some information about your boss is going to be more relevant than information about the new intern or something like that. And so this is a sound heuristic. And in the environment in which we evolved, it was essentially a perfect heuristic. Like, there are a few exceptions, and it was a very good way of deciding broadly how what kind of information you should preferentially pay attention to. Unfortunately, in the environment in which we live, these cues have become much less reliable, because, as you point out in your question, the people who are the most the most popular, the most the strongest, the most the smartest, the most whatever, typically we won't ever meet them, and yet we can't really help but be interested in them. And I think it is one of these kind of adaptive lag, in which case the environment has evolved faster than our psychology, and so we keep being interested in people, even though in reality it doesn't really it's not that relevant. As a side note, it might seem as if it's completely dysfunctional, but if you live in an environment in which everybody shares the same trait, then it doesn't have to be that irrelevant, because If for bad reasons, everybody I know is interested in Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie. If I have new and kind of juicy and kind of secret information about them, I might kind of increase my status among people who share the same interest. And so at that stage, it becomes more of a kind of public good problem. That is, everybody would be better off if no one was interested in celebrities. But given that most people are interested in celebrities, it makes sense from your point of view to also be interested in them, because you can kind of score social points by having new information about them. And also, I mean, we tend to see that very pejoratively as people who read. People's, or I don't know what the names of the magazines who talk about them in the US are, but celebrity about, information about, Hollywood celebrities and these sort of things. But, if I read a biography of Einstein, I'm even less likely to meet him than I am to meet Brad Pitt. But that is, very socially valued among, smart people. And it's not entirely clear that the process is a very different one. So maybe we shouldn't kind of look down on people who are interested in Brad Pitt all that much.
Yeah, that makes sense. Whether it's like the evolutionary lag or it's the social status type thing. One of the reasons I'm curious about this is I had my own thing back in 2019, and I was just blown away by how many people were talking about me, and all this, and why people were feeding into it and all. And I'm like, what? These people don't even know me, but. I was curious, like another topic that I'm very, very interested in is status, right? Our social status and how we signal to other people in our group and how we measure up with other people. And what you said, it makes sense. Like in certain social circles, if we can signal that we're educated or knowledgeable about something, that could be a sign of status. And then people look to us. And I've been curious if that's kind of, where... whether it's like gossip magazines or, journalists who specifically focus on it or whatever it is, they gain status because people are then looking to them for this kind of signal of, oh, this person has information that might be relevant to me. I can't remember which book I was reading this in, but another theory that I heard just about our obsession with like celebrity culture and all that is that something we do is we try to model behavior of people that we deem as successful, right? So when we see someone who's like rich or beautiful or famous, right, we're looking like, how do they talk? How do they live? How do they interact with people? How do they, manage their relationships? And we think, and this also seems irrational, that, I have to kind of watch them because if I act like that, then maybe I can have the same success. And I don't know. It doesn't seem like that's a very successful or useful strategy, but that did sound like kind of a practical theory as well of why we kind of do this and we get obsessed with, watching like shows like Cribs and seeing how rich people live and all that kind of stuff. But yeah. And when I think about it, not only did I love that chapter, I love the whole book. And something that I even made a YouTube video about is how we're terrible at spotting liars. Like something that drives me nuts is body language channels, right? And people who try to sell others on the idea that they can read body language. But yeah, you had an entire chapter in this on how we as humans are absolutely terrible at spotting liars. And it's one of the things that I've been reading a lot about since, diving into books like yours and other books on trust and all that kind of stuff. So can you kind of summarize? I know everybody's about to leave this podcast and go buy a copy of your book, but can you kind of summarize why it's so difficult to tell when someone's lying? And why do we lack this kind of self-awareness that we are terrible and it is nearly impossible to spot a liar purely based on body language or some other small little cues that they might do?
So yes, there has been a lot of research on people's ability to detect lies. And most of that research has looked at situations in which you can't tell who is lying or not just based on the content of what they're telling you. So, for instance, you have employees, and one of them is suspected of stealing something from the office, and you don't know who did it. You can't judge just from what they're telling you. Who did it. They can't. They're not going to say things that are really stupid or self-incriminating. And so researchers have looked at whether demeanor has or kind of carries reliable cues to deception and to lying. So whether people are gonna look at you in the eyes or not, whether they will be fidgeting, whether they will exhibit other signs of nervousness. And what they have found is that if you just look at this kind of cues to demeanor, you cannot at all tell who is lying and who is telling the truth with any reliability whatsoever. And in an evolutionary perspective, that makes complete sense, because there would be, there's no reason that liars would send cues telling, other people that they are lying. Like, it makes no sense whatsoever that they would do that, and nothing stops them from not sending such cues. Like, evolutionarily, if humans, there's nothing stopping humans from evolving the ability to lie without, sweating or looking people in the eyes or fidgeting. I mean, it's there's no constraint there. So it's what we should expect, that people should not be able to tell who lies based on their demeanor and other kind of low level cues. Instead, the way we tell who lies is we look at incentives, and so we are more likely to believe that someone who has a very strong incentive to lie to us is lying to us. I mentioned earlier the example of poker, and so once you're playing poker with your friends, you essentially assume that they're lying to you, or that they might be lying to you, and you discount whatever they tell you, irrespective of whatever cue you might try to read. And it's just it's really impossible. You can just you just can't rely on what they're telling you, because they have no incentive to tell you the truth. So that is the main thing that people use is the incentives of the speaker to decide whether they are lying or not. As I mentioned earlier, they also look at the content. So if you tell me something that I know is false, then I know you're lying. So that's something that these experiments that do not look at, but that is something that in everyday life we use all the time. And the main mechanism that we use, because usually liars tend to, are smart enough not to say things that blatantly contradict reality, is that we check after the fact whether the person was lying to us or not. And if we find out that they were lying to us, then they will, suffer consequences. We will, be angry at them. We might, aggress them. We will lower, the esteem we have for them. And that is what mostly keeps people in check. So I guess, as you were saying, even though we know that people, and that includes kind of professionals, policemen and policewomen, and law enforcement people more generally, are unable to tell who lies and who tells the truth just based on these kind of behavioral demeanor cues. And yet they believe that they can, and even lay people who are also useless also believe that they can tell liars. And so what's interesting is why do we believe that? And I guess so I don't it's not something I've really thought about all that much, but if I had to take a guess, it would be that it is, in a way, we are able to catch most liars, but not in that way. And so we are right that we're good at catching liars more generally. So maybe we're just confused about how we do it. And it's also good for other people, to believe that we're good at catching liars. And so it would kind of make sense that we would want them to believe that, even if it's not true. So maybe that's why we tell them that.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons I love evolutionary psychology, because I love the way you broke it down. Like, we would not evolve in a way that would show people that we're lying, right? And in your book and many other books, it dives into that of deception and even in the animal kingdom. and all of that, right? And yeah, it's something I wonder about. I'm like, why do we think we're so good at this? And you brought up another good point. I was recently reading another book. It was called Liars and Outliers, and was talking about just how we run successful societies, and there are punishments for lying and things like that, and that's one of the best ways to keep all of us in check. But yeah, like we can catch liars, but not in that way. And sometimes I wonder when I see people, like some of these body language channels, or even some of the books on reading body language. I think one of the best sellers is What Everybody Is Saying. Is from an ex-FBI guy. And yeah, I think here's Chris's theory about this. The reason why we believe that, someone looked up and to the left, or they scratched their nose when I asked them that question, and we believe that body language is some kind of major tell, is purely because we're control freaks. My theory is we don't like one of the primary factors that we don't like to believe that we could not catch somebody who is lying to our face, right? We don't want to believe that our partner could ever cheat on us, so we want to know that we could catch them. And it's interesting too, because with so many wrongful convictions, right, and people getting punished for things that they can't do, when I have these debates with people, I'm like, well, lie detectors aren't even admissible in court, because then you get down the whole rabbit hole of, are they lying if they truly believe this thing, And yeah, we could do an entire episode just on lie detection. But I don't want to keep you here all day, Hugo. I got one last question for you. So when we're talking about, body language channels and even law enforcement, like, I want to get your opinion on these specific things, because I don't know if my theory is correct, and you are far more educated and you research this stuff. So when we're looking at this stuff, like, it's this kind of pseudoscience, right? So why do you think, because we're talking about trust, why do you think that people put this kind of blind faith into those who claim they can read body language? Right? Like, there's no evidence. Like, I'm kind of surprised, because, it feels like part of the way that we trust people is that we check someone's track record. And when I see these things, I see the high inaccuracy. So yeah, like, why do you think, we believe this without sufficient evidence? And do you think that body language reading can have any kind of negative consequences if somebody, like, really believes in it?
So that it can have negative consequences is very clear, I think, because people might have been convicted based on law enforcement people thinking that they were lying or telling the truth, thinking that they were lying when they were telling the truth, which might have prompted them to exert more pressure to get confessions, even if they were false confessions, for instance. So clearly there can be negative consequences from that belief when it is held in particular by people in a position of power. And it makes sense that they would want these things to work. I mean, because they are in a situation in which they know that the people who are talking to them have an incentive to lie. And so it's not a very, they can't use that to discriminate between who tells the truth and who lies, because, everybody who is a suspect has potentially an incentive to lie. They can't really wait either to seek an after the fact whether they are telling the truth or lying, because typically if they have to rely on people's testimony, then it means they don't have, material evidence showing, who did it, or, showing what exactly happened. And so their only recourse in many cases is, unfortunately, to look at the behavior of the person. And so it makes sense that they would want to believe that they can do something with that. It would be part of their job, and I'm sure they tell each other that they can do it, and so it makes sense that they would want that to be possible. And unfortunately, it's also relatively intuitive in the sense that a lot of the cues that people associate with lying are just like fidgeting and not looking people in the eyes or sweating, are cues that are just cues of nervousness. And so even if it is true that liars can be nervous, people who are not lying but who are accused of some crime can also be very nervous, obviously. And so nervousness is not a reliable cue to whether someone is lying or not. But it gives you the impression that something is going on, because what you're picking up on is actually nervousness, but you believe you're picking up on lying, and that might be one reason why we believe we can read these cues.
Yeah, and that's something that I get concerned about too, is that, this idea that behaviors associated with nervousness are also indicators of lying. And it's like, as somebody who's struggled with anxiety most of my life, I'm like, you can't indicate that. Like, I remember my friend who did absolutely nothing wrong, and he was just freaking out one time when he got pulled over by a cop, and it was just for something like minor, like a turn signal or whatever, or suspicion of, he might be drunk, and he was completely sober, and he was so nervous. And I'm like, well, if he was reading his cues, my friend would be screwed. But anyways, Hugo, thank you so much for your time. And everybody listening, please, do yourself such a huge favor. Just treat yourself today. Check out the description down below and grab a copy of both of Hugo's books. All right. The first one is Enigma of Reason that he co-authored with Dan Sperber. And the second one is Not Born Yesterday. So yeah, we talked a lot about Not Born Yesterday today, but Enigma of Reason, it really, really helped me out and understand how we reason and all that kind of stuff, which is so important when we're talking about becoming better thinkers. So check out the description down below. There will be links to both the books, as well as Hugo's social media if you want to follow him, keep up to date with all the new stuff he's doing. All right, and before I let you go, just a quick reminder, if you're new here, enjoyed the episode, make sure you follow, make sure you rate it, review it, share it with other people. It helps get the word out. And if you want to support the podcast in any way, there are some links down in the description below. You can support the podcast by getting some of the books that I've written. They're available over on the rewiredsoul.com, or you can become a patron. Or you could also sign up for BetterHelp online therapy. As many of you know, I am in recovery, and yeah, mental health is one of my top priorities, and I've personally used BetterHelp online therapy. It's cheap, it's convenient, you work with licensed therapists, and you do it from the comfort of your home. So if that's something you're interested in, check down below. There is an affiliate link. All right, but anyways, I hope you guys are enjoying this week of scientific thinking and healthy conflict. Tomorrow, I have the amazing Amanda Ripley. And then after that, on Friday, I have Michael Shermer. So you want to make sure that you don't miss it. So once again, thank you so much for tuning in. I hope you have a wonderful, amazing rest of your day, and I will see you in the next one.